The killer in this investigation was stabbing women who worked in small businesses along Colonial Avenue in Orlando.
2 women are found murdered in 2 small specialty shops, only 4 weeks apart. Is a serial killer on the loose?
There was conflicting information in these scenes. The killer had a weapon of choice, but that wasn't the only one he used.
2 mysterious crime scenes, and an investigation that gets more desperate with each passing day.
We had to make sense out of all of these different clues in order to catch the killer before he struck again.
In the suburbs of Orlando, Florida, Debbie Robertson's family begins the afternoon of July 10th like it was any other Sunday.
My daughter Ashley was working in the flower shop with my mother, and we had picked her up a little bit earlier than we had expected and spent a little time with Mom, talked to her for a little while, and then said goodbye and headed home.
But by 6:30 p.m., Debbie is beginning to get worried.
Ashley came to me and said, "Mom, Grandma's not answering the telephone. It's strange. She's not supposed to close the shop for another hour, and I'm worried about her." And so I called the neighboring business. They went down and checked, and indeed her car was parked out front. The doors were both locked, but a flower arrangement was knocked over inside, and that tipped me off that something was wrong. And I said, "Call 911. I'll meet you there."
Orlando PD officer Scott Daniels responds to the scene.
I received a call to check the well-being of a shop owner who wasn't answering her telephone. As I went to check the front door, I found that the door was locked, and it appeared to be somewhat strange due to the fact it was business hours.
Daniels decides to check the store's perimeter.
I came around to the rear of the building, found the back door. It was locked as well. I requested that someone respond with the key so I could check the interior.
Daniels has no idea what he'll find inside, so he calls for backup.
As we went into the store, the only sign of disturbance we found was a plant knocked over. Then as we went to the rear of the store, we found a woman lying on the ground, obviously stabbed to death, and the scissors were still in her chest.
The woman inside the store is grandmother Betty Shea. Her daughter struggles to accept the news.
You never dream that this can really happen to you, and you know, I became a little girl at that moment that I lost my mom.
The man in charge of finding her killer is Orlando Police Detective Bud Jones. This is the crime scene video shot on the night of the murder.
Once we got inside, it was a store that was pretty much covered by a lot of the silk foliage and everything. But towards the rear of the store, some of those silk plants and whatnot were tipped over or knocked or askewed.
One thing is clear. Betty Shea struggled with her assailant, and the motive for the crime isn't hard to figure out.
The paper currency from the cash register was missing. We found that she would have had probably about $10 in currency that she should have had in her wallet. It was not there. We also found out that she should have had at least 2 ATM cards, and we found out that those were not there as well.
But for some reason, the killer didn't search his victim for valuables.
When we did our initial visual inspection of the victim, we also noticed that she had jewelry still on her person, a watch, I believe a ring. These are items that are frequently taken during a robbery.
A robbery, a homicide committed with a pair of scissors, valuables left on the victim. What kind of killer are they looking for? They turn to a different kind of investigator for answers.
Profilers can be very helpful in cases where there aren't any clear leads for the police to follow. We work together to read the behavioral clues to try and focus on the type of individual who committed this type of crime.
For an FBI-trained criminal profiler, every crime scene has its own story to tell.
When we looked at this scene, we knew that this was a robbery-motivated homicide, and it was not random. This killer knew exactly who was going to be in this business when he opened the door and went in.
A 55-year-old shopkeeper named Betty Shea has been murdered in her silk flower store, apparently the victim of a robbery homicide. Detectives hope criminal profiler Dale Hinman will help shed some light on who the killer is before he strikes again. To profile the murderer, Hinman must first understand his actions in the crime scene.
You said the store was locked. Is it one of those type of deadbolts where you can lock it from the inside?
Yeah, and that was one thing that we noted. It's you need a key to lock it from the outside, but it does have a thumb latch inside that you could turn it with your hand, and you didn't need a key if you were locking it from the inside.
So if he locks the door behind him, it sounds like he's very intent on committing a crime and not being interrupted.
But why this store and this victim? Hinman thinks she has an answer.
This perpetrator may have done a little bit of surveillance and realized that he wouldn't be overpowered by multiple employees in the store, and that he may have come here specifically to rob the store and then killed her because he was eliminating the witness to the crime.
But while these are signs that the killer planned his crime, there are other signs that he didn't.
What was the cause of death?
Multiple stab wounds. We ascertained that the murder weapon was a pair of scissors.
Did the scissors come from the store?
There was other scissors that were similar inside the shop. We were fairly confident that those scissors came from inside the store.
Some of the evidence indicates the killer was capable of planning, others that he's disorganized. But which is it? The robbery itself provides another clue.
And we noticed there was no paper currency in the cash register. And we also determined that there were some items missing from her purse.
Was the victim's jewelry taken?
It wasn't taken. We still saw the jewelry on her person.
To Hinman, the fact that the killer didn't take the jewelry is significant.
Well, it could be that he's inexperienced as a killer and was uncomfortable taking jewelry off the victim after he had killed her. This crime just looks so much like an individual who may be a drug user, and they're just very desperate for money and willing to do anything to get it.
With the beginnings of a profile in hand, investigators start looking at known drug users in the area, especially those with a history of robbery. 9 hours after the murder, they get lucky. At 3:45 in the morning, someone attempts to use Betty Shea's stolen ATM card at a machine with a camera.
We found out that the ATM was equipped with video. For us, that's wonderful news. It's really a break.
But the unknown suspect is savvy enough to disable the camera facing him.
He covered up the video camera with a piece of clothing. What he didn't know was that there was a second video camera.
Is this man with the sandy blonde hair Betty Shea's killer? Investigators think there's a good chance he is. But the quality of the image is disappointing.
The date and time was stamped on the video, and it was stamped right across his face, which made it extremely difficult to try to get a positive ID.
But with a killer on the loose, investigators aren't willing to give up yet. Computer experts attempt to enhance the photo by removing the time-date stamp pixel by pixel. It's laborious, painstaking work. But a week later, investigators finally have a picture they can use.
It still didn't show any detail to the face, but it gave the viewer a better idea of what the person behind the time-date stamp would look like.
With a usable photo in hand, investigators take the next step and ask for the public's help.
It's so unusual to have an actual photograph of a perpetrator, so we knew that if we put this out to the media, somebody in the city may recognize him and call in a tip.
Almost immediately, police receive a call about a man who looks just like the suspect in the ATM photo. And he has a criminal record.
This person did have a criminal history. He had a picture on file. We pulled the picture up and looked at the picture and said, yeah, this guy does look a lot like the guy, from the ATM video.
Coming up next, investigators have a suspect, but before they can find him, a second murder. An enhanced ATM photo has revealed the face of the man who may be Betty Shea's killer. And a tip has put investigators on the trail of a man bearing a strong resemblance to the ATM suspect.
One of the tips that we got was a guy that had sandy hair, like the guy in the ATM video. We were able to pull a photograph of him, and he did in fact resemble the guy on the ATM video. We sent detectives out to this guy's house. And when we get those kind of tips, you get real excited that, that might be the one.
But when the man answers the door, detectives know right away this isn't the person in the ATM photo.
He was not wearing a shirt, just as the guy in the ATM video was not wearing a shirt. And at one point, the guy turned around. He had a big, distinctive tattoo on his back. And clearly, the guy in the ATM video that we were looking for did not have a tattoo on his back. So we pretty much ruled him out right then.
Investigators are back to square one.
It's not unusual in a major police investigation such as this for hundreds of leads to pour in, but the police have to follow up on every lead. And in this case, we just had to hope that our media strategy would pay off.
But just 4 weeks later, investigators' worst fears come true. Another murder. In the middle of the afternoon, a customer enters the USA Dart store on Colonial Avenue and finds the store empty. Then, behind the counter, he notices a woman lying on the floor. It's 33-year-old Felicia Hawkins, and she has been stabbed to death.
When a second victim was stabbed, we had to consider the possibility that the cases were related, but we didn't want to rush to judgment. We wanted to go to the scene and look at all the crime facts.
Agent Hinman heads to USA Darts with lead detective Glenn Gauze. The store is only 3 miles from the silk flower shop where Betty Shea was murdered. But is it the same killer?
Dale, this is USA Darts, the scene of the second homicide robbery.
Well, that's very interesting. Both of the businesses are on the same street. They're not very far apart. Both of them are small businesses with one single employee working in the store at the time that the robbery and the homicide occurs.
Now, let's go inside and I'll show you the scene.
The first question Hinman wants answered is whether they have one killer on the loose or two.
Over here, Dale, is where the body was found. Actually, this is the cash register where all the money was taken. The victim was laying on the floor down here, and her pocketbook was sitting up on the stool over there. It didn't appear anything was taken from it.
So the money in the cash register is missing, but her purse is in plain view and nothing in the purse is disturbed.
Nothing was disturbed.
In the first murder, the killer had gone through the victim's purse. And there are other differences.
In this case, the victim was stabbed with a knife, is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, that's different from the first scene, too. Have you spoken to the owner and asked him if the knife belongs in the scene?
Yes, we showed the knife, and he said he didn't recognize it, said there was no reason for that knife to be here at all.
Well, that's different because in the first case, the offender used scissors that he used at the scene, and in this case, the offender came prepared by bringing his own knife to the scene.
Is this the work of a different killer? Or, having succeeded once, did the killer decide to try again, and this time he came prepared? In the back of the store, investigators get their answer.
Dale, if you could follow me in here, I'd like to show you something. We found a pair of scissors in the sink.
just like the scissors that killed Betty Shea. There's no longer any doubt. This is the work of the same killer, and investigators may finally have the evidence they need to catch him: his blood.
Perhaps due to the very violent nature of the struggle that happened in this store, the offender cut himself during the attack, and some of the blood that was recovered in the sink belongs to the offender, and we can do DNA on this blood and help to identify the offender.
Hinman is right, but the blood brings up no matches in the DNA database. A serial killer is prowling these streets, and the only thing investigators know for sure is that he needs money, and he's willing to kill to get it. Then finally, another crucial bit of help from the public.
An individual called in a tip to the police department and said that he knew somebody who had been in a drug rehabilitation center with him, and the individual looked just like the security photo that was taken at the ATM machine.
The man's name is Jerry Bobbitt, and he has prior convictions for drug use. But finding him is another story. Bobbitt has no permanent address on file.
We knew that he hung around in certain areas of Orlando on the west side, so we put our undercover TAC units out in the areas that we knew he frequented.
When body of evidence returns, the search for Jerry Bobbitt. Will police catch the killer before he strikes again? Investigators in the murders of 2 Orlando shopkeepers finally have a prime suspect, a transient named Jerry Bobbitt.
Jerry Bobbitt was a good suspect in this case. He was a drug user with a prior criminal history, and he really needed money.
Police stake out the areas where Bobbitt is known to hang out. They spot him almost at once, but investigators don't have enough probable cause to arrest him for murder or anything else.
We decided to maintain a tail on Bobbitt after the undercover units located him until we could obtain either evidence from the lab or from witnesses identifying him in photo lineups.
Then Bobbitt himself gives officers an excuse to make an arrest.
The area that Bobbitt was in was a known area for male prostitutes to hang out. The officers that were telling him noticed that he was trying to solicit customers, and it was decided it would be best to go ahead and arrest him for prostitution or some illegal offense so that we could interview him that night.
An undercover officer approaches Bobbitt. When he solicits the officer, the TAC unit moves in. Jerry Bobbitt is arrested and brought to the Orlando jail to be interviewed. Since he has no home or car to search for evidence, investigators need to know where he's stashed his belongings. Agent Hinman suggests police conduct the interview as if they already know everything he's done.
Because Jerry Bobbitt had a criminal history and he'd been in the system before, he was not going to be vulnerable to the police fishing for information. It was better to interview him from a position of strength and to just let him have the opportunity to confess.
The tactic works. Bobbitt tells police he's been sleeping under a nearby overpass. Officers descend on the area, scouring the brush for evidence that Bobbitt is the killer they're looking for.
We found a large group of clothing that we believe probably belonged to him. On some of these clothing items, we found stains that we believed probably were blood.
But lab results from the clothing come back negative. However, investigators have one hope left: blood from the crime scene itself.
The lab analyzed the blood that was discovered in the bathroom at USA Darts where the killer had washed his hands, and it was a DNA match to Jerry Bobbitt.
Hinman was right. In the struggle, the killer cut himself, leaving behind undeniable proof of his identity. Faced with this evidence, Jerry Bobbitt accepts a guilty plea in order to avoid the death penalty.
Jerry Bobbitt portrayed himself to be a hopeless drug addict, and the reason he was scamming stores and prostituting himself was because he needed money for crack that bad. The manner in which these two women were killed, though, leads one to believe that there was a lot more sociopathic type behavior than just robbery as a motive.
Jerry Bobbitt is sentenced to life in prison.
These were two wonderful, hardworking women. Tragically, they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. All because one man, in his desperation for drug money, decided to cut their lives short. But because the police and the community worked together, we were able to make sure that Bobbitt would never hurt anyone else again.